Section 4 of Self-Development and the Way to Power by L. W. Rogers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Helen J. Acute Intelligence. The third necessity is keen intelligence. The force of desire, directed by the will, must be supplemented by an alert mind. There is a popular notion that good motives are sufficient in themselves, and that when one has the desire to attain spiritual illumination, plus the will to achieve, nothing more is needed but purity of purpose. But this is a misconception. It is true that the mystic makes devotion the vital thing in his spiritual growth, and it is also true that the three paths of action, knowledge, and devotion blend and become one at a higher stage. But while there are methods of development in which intellect is not at first made a chief factor, it can by no means be ignored in the long run, nor are we now considering those methods. A good intellect, therefore, is a necessary part of the equipment. Good motives play a most important part indeed in occult progress. They safeguard the aspirant on his upward way. Without pure motives, without a large measure of unselfishness, the greatest dangers would encompass him. But good motives cannot take the place of good sense and relieve him of the necessity of thinking. He must develop judgment and discrimination. There are things he must know, and he must use his knowledge, or difficulties will follow, no matter how noble may be his intentions. Suppose, for illustration, that two men set out upon a dark night to cross a wild and rugged piece of ground, one with bad motives, and the other with good. One is going out to rob a house, and if need be, to kill anybody who might try to interfere with his plans. His motives are very bad, but he has perfect knowledge of the dangerous ground he is to cross, and he will therefore travel over it in safety. The other man has the best of motives. He is going to spend the night with a sick and helpless neighbour, but he has no knowledge of the rough and treacherous ground he must cross in the darkness, and his good motives will not insure him against stumbling over the stones or falling into a ditch and breaking his arm. Good motives are not enough. We must know. Progress in occultism is impossible without knowledge. But how is a keen, alert intelligence to be acquired if we do not possess it? Like any other latent faculty or power, it may be evolved. As the physical strength may be steadily increased by constant exercise of the muscles, so mind may increase in power by systematic work. It should be exercised in original thinking. A stated period, if only quarter of an hour daily, can be set aside for the purpose. A book on a serious subject will furnish material, but the too common method of reading, of following the author lazily and accepting whatever he sets forth as a matter of course, is of little value. One must read with discrimination, receiving the ideas offered as a juryman would receive testimony from a witness, considering it from every possible viewpoint, examining it in the light of known facts, turning it over in the mind, weighing it thoughtfully, and accepting or rejecting according to its reasonableness or its lack of reason. In such mental work for intellectual growth, each paragraph can be considered by itself, and only a small portion of the time should be given to the reading, while the remainder is devoted to pondering over what has been read. Of course, a specific study is an advantage, and perhaps nothing is better than to study occultism, thinking deeply upon the problems of human evolution. Another method that goes admirably with such work is the close observation and study of all the life in manifestation about us. We should try to comprehend people, to observe and understand them. Every word, act, and facial expression has its meaning to be caught and interpreted. All this will not only sharpen the wits, but also strengthen human sympathy, for it enables us the better to know the difficulties and sorrows of others. If such practices are followed faithfully day by day, the growth will be steady. Still, another useful practice is to exercise the imagination, the art of creating mental pictures with no physical object present. The face of an absent friend can be called up in the mind and reproduced in every detail. The colour of the eyes and hair, the various moods and expressions, or one's childhood home can be recalled and the imagination made to reconstruct it. The house being complete, the landscape can be reproduced, with the hills, trees, and roads. Repeated practice at seeing mentally is of the greatest value in occult development. While the aspirant is thus working to improve the three essential qualifications of desire, will, and intelligence, to intensify his desire to possess powers for the helping of others, to strengthen the will to get such powers, and to steadily improve the intellect, he should also be giving most earnest attention to meditation, for it is through this practice that the most remarkable results may be produced in the transformation of his bodies, visible and invisible, through which the ego manifests itself in the physical world. In the degree that these are organized and made sensitive and responsive, they cease to be limitations of consciousness. Such sensitiveness and responsiveness may be brought about by meditation, together with proper attention to the purification of the physical and astral bodies, for purity and sensitiveness go together. Meditation is a subject so very important to the aspirant that specific instructions should guide him. The average person, used to the turbulent life of Occidental civilization, will find it a sufficiently difficult matter to control the mind, and to finally acquire the power to direct it as he desires, even with all the conditions in his favour. The serene hours of morning are the most favourable of the 24 for meditation. Regularity has a magic of its own, and the hour should be the same each morning. To be alone in surroundings as quiet as possible is another essential. The most desirable time for meditation is soon after awakening in the morning. Before turning the mind to any of the business affairs of the day, let the aspirant sit calmly down and meditate upon any wholesome thought, like patience, courage, or compassion, keeping the mind steadily upon the subject for 5 minutes. 2 very important things are being accomplished by such meditation. First, we are getting control of the mind and learning to direct it where and how we choose. And second, we are attracting and building into the bodies we possess certain grades of imponderable matter that will make thinking and acting along these lines easier and easier for us until they are established habits and we actually become, in daily life, patient, courageous, and compassionate. Whatever qualities or virtues we desire to possess may be gained through the art of meditation and the effort to live up to the ideal dwelt upon daily by the mind. While it is absolutely true that any human being can make of himself that which he desires to be, can literally raise himself to any ideal he is capable of conceiving, it must not be supposed that it can be done in a short time and by intermittent effort. We sometimes hear it said that all we need to do is to realize that all power is within us, when, presto, we are the thing we would be. It is quite true that we must realise their existence before we can call the latent powers into expression. But the work of arousing the latent into the active is a process of growth, of actual evolutionary change. The physical body as it is now is not sensitive enough to respond to subtle vibrations. Its brain is not capable of receiving and registering the delicate vibrations sent outward by the ego. And the task of changing it so that it can do so is not a trifling or easy one, but every effort produces its effect, and to the persistent and patient devotee of self-development, the final result is certain. But it is not a matter of miraculous accomplishment. It is a process of inner growth. There are, it is quite true, cases in which people who have entered upon this method of self-development have, in a short time, attained spiritual illumination, becoming fully conscious of the invisible world and its inhabitants, while awake in the physical body, extending the horizon of consciousness to include both worlds, and coming into possession of the higher clairvoyance that enables one to trace past causes and modify impending effects. But such people are those who have given so much attention to self-development in past lives that they now have but little more to do in order to come into full possession of occult powers. Sometimes it requires little more than the turning of their attention to the matter. Becoming a member of the Theosophical Society, or seriously taking up theosophical studies, is sometimes the final step that leads to the opening of the inner sight. But how can one know to what point he may have advanced in the past, and where he now stands? How may we know whether there is but a little work ahead, or a great deal? We cannot know, nor is it important to know. The person who should take up the task merely because he thinks there is little to do would certainly fail. The very fact that he would not venture upon the undertaking if he thought the task a difficult one is evidence that he has not the qualifications necessary for the success of the occult student. Unless he is filled with a longing to possess greater power to be used in the service of humanity, and fired with an enthusiasm that would hesitate at no difficulties, he has not yet reached the point in his evolution where he awaits only the final steps that will make him a disciple. But even the absence of the keen desire for spiritual progress, which is the best evidence of the probability of success, should not deter anybody from entering upon the systematic study of Theosophy and devoting to it all the time and energy he can. Nor should the thought that many years might pass without producing any very remarkable results lead him to conclude that the undertaking would not be a profitable one. The time will come with each human being when he will step out of the great throng that drifts with the tide and enter upon the course of conscious evolution, assisting nature instead of ignoring her beneficent plan. But since it is but a question of time, the sooner a beginning is made, the better, for the sooner will suffering cease. There should be a word of warning about the folly of trying to reach spiritual illumination by artificial methods. Astral sight is sometimes quickly developed by crystal gazing, and also by certain regulation of the breathing. For two reasons such methods should be avoided. One is that any powers thus gained cannot be permanent, and the other is that they may be more or less dangerous. Many people have made physical wrecks of themselves or have become insane by some of these methods. There are those who advertise to quickly teach clairvoyance for a consideration, as though spiritual powers could really be conferred instead of evolved. It is true that efforts towards the evolution of such powers may be enormously aided by teachers, but such instruction cannot be bought, and the offer to furnish it for money is the best evidence of its worthlessness. Those who teach this ancient wisdom select their own pupils from the morally fit, and tuition can be paid only in devotion to truth and service to humanity. That is the only road that leads to instruction worth having, and until the aspirant is firmly upon that sound moral ground, he is much better off without powers, the selfish use of which would lead to certain disaster. But how shall the pupil find the teacher? He need not find him at first, so far as the limited consciousness is concerned. Long before he knows anything of it in his waking hours, he may be receiving instruction while he is out of the physical body during the hours of sleep. The teacher finds the pupil long before the pupil suspects that the teacher exists, and since it is the pupil who has the limited consciousness, it is quite natural that it should be so. Thus, it is inevitable that all who enter upon the way that leads to spiritual illumination must long remain ignorant of the fact that any teachers are interested in them, or that anybody is giving the slightest attention to them. Naturally enough, one cannot know until the moment arrives when his brain has become sufficiently sensitive to retain a memory of at least a fragment of his superphysical experiences. But what leads to the selection of the pupil? His earnestness, his unselfishness, his devotion, his spiritual aspirations. There is an old occult maxim to the effect that when the pupil is ready, the master is waiting. They have need of many more than are ready to be taught. Those who lead and enlighten watch eagerly for all who will qualify themselves to enter upon the upward way. Every human being gets exactly what he fits himself to receive. He cannot possibly be overlooked. By his spiritual aspiration, each lights the lamp in the window of his soul, and to the watchers from the heights, that light against the background of the overwhelming materiality of our times must be as the sun in a cloudless sky. Other things come later, but these simpler things, to realize the necessity for conscious evolution, to comprehend the method of soul development, to take full control of the mind and the physical body, to resolutely curb the grosser desires, and to give free rein to the higher aspirations, are the first infant steps in the self-development that leads to illumination. Then we begin to discover that this very desire for greater spiritual power is generating a force that carries us forward and upward. We soon begin to observe actual progress. The brain becomes clearer, the intellect keener. Our sphere of influence grows wider. Our friendships become warmer. Aspiration lifts us into a new and radiant life, and the wondrous powers of the soul begin to become a conscious possession. And to this soul growth there is no limit. The aspirant will go on and on in this life and others, with an ever-extending horizon of consciousness, until he has the mental grasp of a Plato, the vivid imagination of a Dante, and the intuitive perception of a Shakespeare. It is not by the outward acquirement of facts that such men become wise and great. It is by developing the soul from within until it illuminates the brain with that flood of light called genius. And when, through the strife and storm, we finally reach the tranquillity of the inner peace, we shall comprehend the great fact that life really is joy when lived in the possession of spiritual power and in perfect harmony with the laws of the universe. With even these first steps in occult achievement, the aspirant enters upon a higher and more satisfactory life than he has ever known. Literally, he becomes a new man. Gradually, the old desires and impulses fade away, and new and nobler aspirations take their place. He has learned obedience to law, only to find that obedience was the road to conquest. He has risen above the gross and sensuous by the power of conscious evolution, and, looking back upon what he has been with neither regret nor apology, he comprehends that significant thought of Tennyson: "On stepping stones of their dead selves, men rise to higher things." End of Self-Development and the Way to Power by L. W. Rogers.